Okay, I'm going to switch to English because we're working from ASL to English. You both said that you have already watched it, right? That your prep was, have you done other prep work besides watching it? Do you know about Nigel himself? Are you familiar with street leverage? What do you know about DIs, CDIs, the process? When was this filmed? How does the timing of the film play into what's going on? What was the philosophy of the interpreting field at that time? So let's talk about that.
Yeah. I think it was 2013. I need to look again, but because that's like the first thing I've noticed through this internship is to look at the date because so much has changed. So, but I mean, it makes sense of what he's talking about, but I can't believe for 18 years, but that makes sense because interpreters have been
just 8 years, not 18.
Okay, see, Yvette and I discussed that before this because I'm like, is it 8 or 18? And like, we both like, okay, we saw the 10, so I'm glad. Yeah, we clarified that. Yeah.
Yeah, so 2013 to now, that's 8 years.
Okay.
No, Lyndsi means in the video he says he's been working for 18 years.
Oh,
but that was filmed eight years ago. Yeah. Okay, got it.
So that would mean 26 years ago that he started.
Yeah.
But what does he look like age-wise in that video? Could he have been working as a DI for 18 years? Just a DI, not certified, because that's not been around. But could he have been working as a DI for 18 years age-wise?
I think so. Well, depending on when he talks about DIs have been around since deaf people have been around. So he could have been interpreting for his parents.
Yeah, I mean, maybe not professionally working, but
yeah.
So the other thing I would pay attention to when you make that decision, I can't remember that part, to be honest with you, and I think I've seen this movie 20 times, so I'm surprised I can't remember. Does he do this movement? Open, or does he have a twist? So I've seen 18, as in 10-18. I've seen 18, and I've seen this. And this sign of 18 is from Minnesota. So if you think about where Minnesota is compared to British Columbia, they're both on that northern border. There could be, so pay attention if it's this or this.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure he does this. Like he holds it.
Okay. So twist is definitely 18.
Yeah.
I think he's just saying that he's been working in the field, but not like a deaf interpreter for 18 years, but he's been in the field for 18 years.
Well, Nigel and I started in the same year, if that's true, the 18. So 2013 back to 1997. And I've been interpreting since 1997. Or at least in the field, maybe not certified, but so for sure. And I did know about deaf interpreters at that time. So I think that's reasonable to say 18. Yeah. The other thing that you might want to look at anytime you're trying to decipher that is what was the word before 18? Does it have something that is this hand shape that it would be close to the body that could cause that to look like 18, but really it's the sign before?
Okay. Yeah.
Wow. I didn't think about that.
I know.
I'm gonna type this out.
For me, I was familiar with all the acronyms of the different workshops he's done, but I just looked them up just to make sure because there's lots of letters in there. So that was one of my controls.
So when you think about your audience, I don't know if you're thinking about you're there at Street Leverage in 2013 providing the interpreting services. Is that the framework that you're going from? Or are you interpreting to me as your mentor? Are you interpreting to each other as peers? What do you view your audience as? That will definitely affect the choices that you make.
I usually try to put myself in the video.
Yep. Same.
I like that because that's who Nigel's talking to, so it makes it easier for you.
Yeah.
And I think the audience, he talks about them being hearing interpreters, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah.
Okay, so we're time traveling with Marty McFly back into 2013. Great.
Mm-hmm.
What else is in there that you want to flesh out before we start interpreting?
So from what I understood, he is basically like, there's at one point where he compares hearing interpreters to deaf interpreters, and how there's like a negative like bias, I guess, towards deaf interpreters, because they think that, well, then if they need
to be specific with your pronouns, that will help you in the video when there's constructed dialogue.
Deaf clients, when deaf clients see a deaf interpreter show up, the deaf client is usually like, well, is there a reason why they're here? Like, does the hearing interpreter think that my language level is low and that I'm going to need a deaf interpreter in order to communicate? But Nigel is saying that is not always the case, but that is the bias that has been placed on deaf interpreters, or having deaf interpreters present. Am I correct in?
You used a phrase that I'm going to challenge you to pick something different. That my language is low is what you said, or that the deaf person feels like my language is low.
They have a language deprivation. I
think that would be more accurate to what something hearing Nigel would say.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or don't believe my ASL skills are comprehensible. You'll see this, but if we're trying to let go of form, those might be a couple of different ways you want to practice phrasing them.
Okay. Like I said, I understand like the concept of what he's saying, but to like pick each sentence and form it into an English sentence is what I'm struggling with.
Okay, so he uses PowerPoints in this a lot.
Yes.
But the way it's videoed, it's like, hello.
I know. And then he's constantly pointing to it. So I like took pictures of
You
each
did?
thing. Yeah, I took pictures and I was like trying to
came up with that control. I'm so excited.
Yeah. So I had them all on my phone, but it was hard though to be like have it on and like and not go dark, and then like when he's pointing to something, and especially if he's clarifying with the audience, I'm like, wait, which one is he on? I can't remember because there were so many bullet points. So
And it does this, which I don't know if I've ever seen.
Universal interpreting, universal sign language, but he's going to talk about that it's not an actual language, even though that's the word that we give it. Universal sign language. Lyndsi, I want to quickly offer you a solution. Anytime that I am interpreting and using my phone as a tool, I put it on do not disturb and I change the darkness to never.
Oh my goodness. I didn't even know that was an option. Cool.
So I think it's called, are you using an Apple or an Android?
Android.
Okay. I don't know where it is in your settings, but I use an Apple and it says auto shut off. It's what mine's called.
Okay.
Yeah, it's under settings.
Cool.
Yeah, it's definitely.
Thank you. Yeah, that was one of the first times, because usually I have notes or like I was going to take screenshots of it, but I'm like, well, that would be hard to see when I'm interpreting. So cool. Thank you. There was another piece where I was trying to just keep track of when he was role shifting a lot, because I know he kept the deaf interpreter on one side. And then it helped to know when he shifted to the other side if it was coming from a hearing interpreter's perception or the deaf community's perception, because he kept those on the same side. So because there's a couple times where it's like when he first talks about the different perceptions, like had the deaf interpreter feeling that their skills weren't up to par, or was it the hearing interpreter feeling, oh, they're in here, so now they're superior to me? So there was a couple times where I was a little confused of who was doing what. So
he says it from both perspectives. He
ended up doing it from both perspectives. Yeah.
The hearing interpreter would be like, oh, well, the deaf interpreter's here, so they're they're more superior to me. But then the deaf interpreter said the same thing, like, oh, well, the hearing interpreter is here, so I'm automatically like this because of the bias. Am I right in saying that?
Sort of. He's talking about, if I think I'm talking about the same place you're seeing, he's talking about a deaf consumer's perspective of a hearing interpreter has 2 or 4 year degree and has all of their continuing ed requirements versus a deaf interpreter to get certified only is required a 16-hour workshop.
From RID, yeah.
Yep.
And so, which is not the case anymore. Now there's actual rigorous testing, but
yeah.
So the deaf consumer's perspective is like, what are you doing here with this little baby amount of training?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay.
Does that help? Clarification? Is that the part you were talking about?
Yes.
Okay. Anything else that I don't know how far we'll get? I'm thinking maybe that much, or maybe the part about the deaf interpreters. Was there any questions you had about when he starts talking about the role? Excuse me. He's talking about the role of the deaf interpreter for deaf blind people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So he was talking about deaf blind interpreters and deaf blind interveners and how that's completely different than deaf interpreters.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's what I picked up from it. I can't remember what was the next part of that, but just making it so clear that they were separate.
And I think the part before that, actually, he has a PowerPoint where he talks about relay interpreting.
Yep. Shadow,
and mirroring.
Yep.
And he's doing this back and forth when he's explaining these two things back and forth. So it's kind of hard to know what he's talking about. Mm-hmm. So let's go ahead and have one of you start if you have a strong preference about being the starter or not. And I'm great for you to just do it if you just want the practice of actual raw interpreting, or if you feel like you really want to discuss his language choices and how different ways we might choose to interpret that. You can pause that and then we can open it up to dialogue for that. So just let us know which of those avenues feels like a match for what you need to learn today.
I think for me, I would like to take like a chunk and then interpret it and then get your guys' feedback, because then I can find the areas where we're not as effective and learn from that is but Yvette, if you want to go all the way through or do it whatever way you want.
Why don't you go first and then, I can do the same thing, but I might feel like I want to stop once I get into doing it and then be like, can we talk about this?
Yeah.
And Yvette, since you're going second, you'll have the choice of picking up where Lyndsi left off or redoing that for your own personal practice of, that was great dialogue. I feel like that was a lot of stuff I want to try to incorporate and I want to apply it to what we just saw. So you'll be able to make that decision.
Okay.
Okay. Do you want me to share my screen and play it?
I think that will work the best. Let's try it.
Yep.
Also, Lyndsi, would you like to have any kind of team support? Do you want like a word or a feed, or how will you let me do that? Or you just want to be you all the way, stop it as you need, and we won't worry about that?
Yeah, I think I did my first team interpretation from ASL to voicing, and I thought it was much easier to feed because she would just talk over and fill in what I missed, and then I would pick up on the next sentence.
Okay. Why don't we try having me be your feed? Then Yvette, you can just focus on just the interpreting process and you don't have to worry as much about the feeding part. I will say that for a Zoom, we don't usually talk over each other if we're actually interpreting in Zoom. So for the intents and purposes of this, you and I are physically side by side at street leverage physically in their room. Will that work? Yeah.
Can I ask over Zoom? Because it's difficult to know. Or what was your reasoning for not doing that?
It just really, especially, you see how as we're taking turns talking, that yellow box is jumping back and forth. Then it screws up for the deaf person and the presenters and the hearing people. And so it just creates a lot. Plus, it's really auditorily distracting to hear two different voices, just like la 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 la, blah, 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 la 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 la, blah, blah, blah. It's the cadence and rhythm is distracting. So things that I have done in Zoom meetings is just give feeds in the chat, personally to my team interpreter, Sometimes I have to let errors go while it's their turn, and I just give a general comment about, oh, they're talking about this, and then I have to make repairs when I'm back on, and then my team has it.
Yep.
I've had my teams when I've been the weaker interpreter, like maybe they've done the meeting a bunch of times, they send me chats about name signs or about acronyms that they've used or what was talked about at a previous meeting. So they will send me that information. But sometimes as the working interpreter, I can't look at it until I've turned over my time.
Yeah.
So it's not great. I have yet to find somebody who will agree to doing an actual phone call. Aside from this, I want somebody that will do that, but nobody's agreed to it yet. I think that would be really helpful, especially in a voicing assignment where I could hear them on the phone and then just be the interpreter.
Yeah.
So maybe someday you'll get a chance to do that and somebody will agree to it. Yvette's going to be your team and be willing to do that.
I actually worked with Kelly Stein. I did a interpretation for last semester for one of our classes, and I was paired with the regular interpreter for this assignment, and it just so happened to be her.
Oh.
So we got to team together, and that's what we did. We were connected through our phones, and I like had her in my ear. Mm-hmm. So when I would miss something, she was right there.
That's cool.
It was amazing.
That's awesome.
Well, I don't know why people don't want to play that game with me, but
I would play that game with you if I had the chance.
Great. I'll let you know next time I get assigned a Zoom interpreting job.
Heck yes, that's awesome. Okay, so do you want me to just do the first 5 minutes or a couple minutes or?
We can go like, what time is it? 6-ish minutes.
Okay.
6 or 7 minutes, unless you feel like you want to pause and discuss, then we'll just let you have that much time.
Okay. I'll try to watch the time, but if not,
I'll watch the time. I'll just tell you when to stop.
Okay, perfect.
And you don't have to worry about it.
Okay. Can you guys all see it?
Great.
Okay. My name is Nigel Howard, and I live in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. I don't live in the north where it's really cold. I live in the nice green area. I've been a deaf interpreter for about 18 years. I interpret in many different settings and professions: medical, mental health, community, theater, internationally, many different areas. Here's a little bit about my background.
Lyndsi, I'm sorry to interrupt, but is it really jumpy for y'all? Because it's not clear at all for me.
It will be for you, Yvette. So when it's your turn, you'll have to be the host and share your own screen.
Okay.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah, because it's not choppy for me. But okay, I'm just gonna go back. I interpret locally in legal settings, mental health, medical, many different areas. I interpret national workshops such as Association for Visual Language Interpreters of Canada, many different workshops throughout Canada. I interpret internationally at the World Federation for the Deaf, the World Association for Sign Language Interpreters, so many different areas internationally as well. As you can see, many people have different perceptions and perspectives of different areas. So, for example, a deaf interpreter and a hearing interpreter may have different ideas and perceptions on their roles. They may believe many things that are different, such as having a team interpretation. And it's really important that they both are on the same level and are synchronized to have the same meaning and ideas that are similar. Because a deaf interpreter may think many different things, and a hearing interpreter may take those exact things and have different meanings. So it's really important for the interpreting team to be synchronized for a successful interpretation. may be wondering what a deaf interpreter is for or if they're really needed. And yes, deaf interpreters are new as far as a profession, but deaf interpreters have been around since deaf people have been around. For example, if you're in a school setting and the teacher doesn't have a lot of ASL fluency, a student may ask another student to interpret for them. So that's been around. The function of interpreting has been around. But as a profession, yeah, it is something new. There's many trainings and training programs and professional development classes, but there's not a lot around yet, but it is emerging throughout. Yes, there needs to be a lot more training programs. There's not enough right now. So if you bring in a deaf interpreter, they may have the perception that their skills aren't up to par. They may have concerns that their interpretation isn't as clear.
Can you pause it, Lyndsi?
Yep.
Who is he? Whose perception is he talking about
I
right
know
now?
this is exactly the part so this first part of it, because I know he goes into deaf interpreters right after this, viewing that they have really skilled ASL fluency, so they are skilled as interpreters, they think. So this part, is it coming from hearing interpreters or is it deaf interpreters themselves?
It's the hearing interpreter going, "You came in here means my side."
Okay, that's what that part confused me. So,
and you use the pronoun they, which is fine, but you didn't give an antecedent
okay.
of hearing interpreters. And I think it was because you weren't sure.
Yeah,
so
that's the exact part. I wasn't sure.
The message is good, except for we're missing the context.
Okay. I'll just go back a little bit.
Okay.
A hearing interpreter may think when a deaf interpreter is hired for a team, they may really doubt themselves. They may have a lot of concerns on their specific skills personally.
There was this to know who he was talking about.
Okay.
Did you see it?
The hearing interpreter?
I just want you to feel comfortable with the language setup so that you
Yeah.
can recognize it in the future. So maybe go back 20-ish seconds. Yep. Don't interpret right now. I'm going to just kind of a little bit further.
A little bit, yeah.
A little bit more.
There we go.
So pulling in the deaf interpreter and that person's out far means me. Oh, it's kind of choppy. I'm having a hard time with it.
And he clearly role shifted into the hearing interpreter.
Okay, so you're able to recognize it now?
Yeah, yeah.
Great.
And
okay.
I apologize. I don't know why this is ending in 10 minutes because I have unlimited time.
Oh, so well, does everybody just want to log out and log back in so that we have another fresh 20 minutes while we're at this stopping spot? All right, I'll see you guys in a hot second. Lyndsi, if you can hear us, we cannot see you.
Okay. I'm just sharing my screen here. Okay.
Great.
Are we good?
Okay. Yep.
Okay. A hearing interpreter may think their interpreting isn't as clear. They may have a lot of concerns and a lot of self-doubt. And they may not be viewed as a professional interpreter. But as far as a deaf interpreter, they may come in and feel like their ASL fluency is very skilled, and they may automatically think that their interpreting skills are just as skilled. But that doesn't necessarily mean that, because we all know what areas that we are more comfortable in and what areas that we need more work in.
Great job.
The deaf community may have perceptions on deaf interpreters as well. They may know their background, and growing up with them, they may have pre-perceptions on them. They may remember the deaf interpreter back in school and will say, yeah, they were a good student, but the point is that the deaf interpreter community is very small, and a deaf interpreter that may come into their community may be judged that their skills aren't up to par, and their skills may not, they may feel that their skills are not appropriate for a deaf interpreter. The deaf community view on deaf interpreters may be very different. They may think that the deaf interpreter is there because the deaf consumer may not understand something, and they may think that they're superior to them. They may not understand that deaf interpreters have been around for a long time. They may realize that their background wasn't so good and may assume things that the deaf interpreter as a professional is different than when they were growing up in the deaf community. They may not understand that there's many trainings for deaf interpreters that are specific to the deaf interpreter role in many different areas.
Okay, let's pause there.
Okay.
Okay, your floor, Lyndsi. What do you want to talk about? How do you feel about it in general? Was the prep helpful? Where do you want to go from here?
So the other thing I was going to discuss about prep is that I did Google this directly into street leverage, and I found the English transcript, but it's completely different, which makes sense because English is completely different than this. But so, and this is the other goal that I had is compression, because he gives a lot of like examples of things, but what's the point of it? And so that's what I try to lean towards. Because I think at the beginning, I think it was successful or effective for me for the most part. But the second half that I interpreted, there's a lot of signs and like expansion in there, and I try to condense it, but I don't know if I try to go for the meaning and the goal instead of every little detail. But
so your guts, how do you feel you did on that?
The second half, not so good as I would hope, but overall.
Yvette, did you feel like that she was not able to incorporate meaning, or do you have any thoughts or observations that you want to share?
Honestly, I thought you did fantastic. I thought you had his prosody down and his personality. Your vocabulary level was like just right. Like it wasn't like over their heads, but it wasn't like down here either. And you made it like, we know it's a presentation, but it was also like kind of like, hey guys, like I have this information. I just want to like kind of chat with you about a little bit. But it was also kind of like, but this is my perspective. And so I thought you did really great. I was like, wow.
I agree with you, Yvette. The one thing that I noticed that maybe this stems or is the trigger of your comment, Lyndsi, is you said the word phrasing, many different things a couple of times.
Yep.
And things is actually a pronoun for something that you didn't give us.
Many different things.
I'm wondering if it's related to his sign of like variety, or he does this a lot, etc. kind of, or this he uses. Mm-hmm. So even if you don't know what it is,
yeah,
I just would challenge you to find another way to say many different things.
Okay.
Of the sort.
Yeah.
And likewise, etc. And one way that you might improve that quicker cognitive, because you will be able to think of them now that you're not in there, is look for those places in his production. Watch. So then right before you start it, write down as many different ways you can think of to say that phrase.
Okay.
Watch it and say one of them. Go back to that same small section, watch it and voice it as a different way. Watch it again and voice it as a different way. So that will start creating some neural pathways for you to have that recollection more quickly versus after the fact. Oh, I wish I could have said that and I could have said that. It's because we're working so hard and those neural pathways aren't yet stimulated. So if you can start developing those by doing this active looping with lots of different ways to say it, that will help you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to take over, Yvette, or do you want me to? Okay.
No, yeah, your video was very choppy. I knew what the video was about, but it was really hard for me to decipher this.
Do you want to share your screen then?
Yes.
Okay, let me give you permission.
This meeting is being recorded.
Oh, you know what? Oh, it is being recorded. Good. Okay.
I have a backup recording on my screen, so we're good.
Okay, great.
Okay, let me do this. Lyndsi, how did you have it where like we were next to?
I know we're really small, right?
Oh, you can drag. So are you able to see all of us, Yvette, all three of us?
Yes.
And you want to make Nigel smaller?
No, I didn't want us to like get in the way of his signing, but I don't think he moves far from this area that he's in right now. Lyndsi, do you remember where we stopped for you?
Oh, yeah, let me look. I think it was like 540, but I can tell you the exact. Yep, 540.
So maybe start at 520 so you can kind of feel the rhythm and then pick up where you think is a good transition spot.
Okay. Where did you get your training?
Ultra Foot Shape Comfort.
Do they have trainings that are related to
so nothing gets in the
mental health or different types of situations that you may encounter? For CDIs, they only have to do a 16-hour training. So compared to the hearing interpreter who has a 2-year program or a 4-year program degree, most deaf clients would pick the hearing interpreter. That's the reality of the situation.
Great.
So the hearing interpreter's perspective may be, well, I've studied all these years and I put in the work. Why would they bring in a deaf interpreter? What is the need of having a team that is a deaf interpreter? And they may have the perspective of, well, since they're deaf, then I'm definitely inferior to them. Okay, now I'm confused as who he's talking about.
Okay, he's talking about the deaf consumers, but if you want to rewind it, we can find so you can see it.
Okay.
So he's moving to the next one. That's part of it. Deaf interpreting community themselves. That guy's signs not great, or he's not part of the deaf community. So right. Pause right here.
So this interpreter isn't really involved in the deaf community. So how do I know their skills are adequate?
Mm-hmm. And he's using 2 different spaces for 2 different deaf interpreters. That's the one thing that's kind of confusing in this, is because you're like, well, is he? But it's actually just 2 people that he's referring to.
Got it. Okay. The deaf interpreter community itself is rather small. No, I'm going to do that again. Because I don't like how I glossed itself. Were you going to say something?
I just was going to have you practice what you wanted to say before you press play.
So I say so a lot. That is my.
You can do the same training where you write down a lot of different transitions and watch transitions and practice saying them. Yeah.
I wrote it down.
Okay. It's the same process.
The deaf interpreting community is inclusive? No. What is that word that means?
Selective?
Selective. Okay. Would that be okay?
Well, he's talking about we're here and then a new one comes in and we're like, your sign's not great. You haven't been in the deaf community.
So that is selective.
Yeah.
I think it is. What do you think, Lindsay? Yes?
Yeah. I didn't think that until we talked about the next phrase coming up, and then yeah, definitely.
Okay. All right, go ahead, Yvette.
So the deaf interpreting community is selective, and there may be a new deaf interpreter that joins, and the other deaf interpreters may have a negative perspective about them because they don't know much about this new deaf interpreter. But this deaf interpreter is saying, well, I'm certified. I have the C in front of the DI. I have worked in many different settings. I'm certified. So being certified is good, yes. But certified hearing interpreters, it's different. He's comparing deaf interpreters being certified compared to hearing certified interpreters.
Mm-hmm. So he's saying, like hearing interpreters, they're certified too, but C,
no C.
I'm an interpreter, that's enough. So so before you go back and press play, tell me kind of what you want to say.
That's kind of like a little mind-blowing a little bit when you think about it. Because it's like, why don't we have that? But we don't need it because we're hearing. Well,
and we have created a standard within our interpreting community where if you say you're an interpreter, we don't question that. If you say you're an interpreter, we assume that you also know that means certified, knows your place, has language skills. Like we assume that there's a lot of packing in that. But the deaf community doesn't necessarily feel that way and so that's why many deaf interpreters, I'm certified deaf interpreter, like to emphasize that I did the training. I'm there. I'm part of this community.
Okay.
Where hearing interpreters have been established long enough, they're not as worried about that credential.
They want to prove that I finished those 16 hours and I have the training and I passed. So I'm certified and that should be recognized. I agree. But why do we need to emphasize that certification? We can just say I'm an interpreter and that's it. And then that would be equal enough to I missed it.
So he's using this as a Canadian sign for automatic, and then he signs automatic.
So why are we emphasizing the certification part? I'm an interpreter, that's it. I'm skilled in this area and in other areas that relate to interpreting. So having a certification, does that mean you're automatically skilled in each area that you are going to encounter during your profession?
Great.
So that's something that we need to really look at about that word certification. So this deaf interpreter may have grown up in a mainstream setting. And did they automatically get that certification? That could be a perspective that some people may have about this deaf interpreter. Am I right in saying that, what I just said?
Yeah, he's saying, so he's still talking from the deaf interpreter's perspective of bringing in somebody new. So he's saying, but you were mainstream. So how do you have enough cultural knowledge or sign skills to be doing this job? Or you don't sign well. How do you have enough skills to be in this profession?
That's what I know what he's saying, but I am struggling so hard to get the words out of my mouth.
Okay, so back it up and tell me, just voice it in gloss.
Certification, emphasis, why certification?
Not needed. Oh, that's enough.
I can skill that area, but this area, not so much. That area, yes, I'm honest. My certification is automatic. That means I'm skilled in every area, even if I'm not. I can't gloss.
I know, it's hard.
You're doing okay.
So we need to think about that when it comes to certification. But he says deaf not. Why?
Yeah, he says this is capital D deaf that he's using. Culturally deaf, not why this.
Okay.
Deaf not. So maybe he really means deaf this. Deaf this. Because of this.
Okay.
So I think that that's been the challenges that we've kind of been talking about hearing status, and now all of a sudden he's introducing this sign as a cultural status.
Okay. I'm going to start interpreting again.
Mm-hmm.
So why would they get a certification? So the community's view of this interpreter may vary depending on the basic ideas.
Can you pause it?
Yeah.
When else has he used this?
When talking about the interpreters viewing each other.
At the very beginning, when he introduced the topic of not everybody reads the same book.
Right. So we all have different perspectives.
So this is his nice little bow on the end of his discussion of that.
So that's
point, information, point.
Okay.
So that's an indication for you to say. So that's where I'm coming from with this idea of not everyone reads the same book twice. He didn't say it, but that's what he meant.
All right. Okay, I'm going to do this now. So often people are confused about what deaf interpreters do. Do they just transfer the note? Do they just facilitate communication and that's it?
What was the word on the PowerPoint?
Relay.
That's where you guys can really benefit, both of you, is Lyndsi, you already took the pictures of it, but the visual aid should help you pick the right words. Yep. It's already written there for you, so you don't have to struggle to choose one.
All right, I'm going to do it again.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry I keep pausing.
No, this is great learning.
It's so frustrating because before internship, I feel like I could have voiced this and been great. But I feel like I'm just so physically and mentally just like drained that it's so hard to produce the words.
Do you feel like that your brain is fried, or maybe previously you didn't know the errors that you now know about? Or
yes.
Yeah. So your perspective from before might not have been as accurate.
Right. So before I would just voice, but now I'm like, no, like the first thing that pops in my head, I'm like, no, Yvette, that's not correct. So then nothing comes out of my mouth.
Do you feel like it's not correct because you are choosing gloss signs? Why do you feel like it's not correct if you could have done it before?
I don't know. I think maybe you're right. I'm just fried.
I think it's both.
Well, that's a legitimate interpersonal demand. Mm-hmm. This is what I have to work with. I wish I could offer you a full cup of milk, but this is a drop of water. That's all I got.
Mhm.
Yeah. Well,
That's
maybe
fair.
maybe a little more than a drop, but
Like a quarter cup.
yeah.
I think it's both, and we also are more skilled now, so we know all the different concurrent demands, like who the audience is, getting that
Yeah.
lexicon to it. So we have all these other things that we're trying to incorporate of what we learned in this past semester.
I love that, Lyndsi. I think that that's really true, is that we're like, oh yeah, before I could just interpret it, but I never thought about who's listening. I've never thought about if I need to make different word choices. I've never thought about carrying somebody's personality through this message. I just was fine to be me and say what I wanted.
Yeah,
So
the register, motion.
Yeah.
I think that the stimuli that we've been working with have been like, compared to ones that I've done before. Like there was one we did a few weeks ago. Is ASL2 black or is ASL2 white? And I mean, I got nothing. So I think I feel a little like this when it comes to the voicing aspect right now. So I'm like, I want so badly to say it, but it's like, I can't pull it out,
Yeah.
You are getting, I know what stimuluses they have chosen, and they're great because they really push you to grow.
Yes.
And it does feel frustrating. Growth is always painful, sadly.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want to be an interpreter, you just have to say, you know what? I'm going to be in a constant state of growth, stretching my cocoon, spreading my wings, drying out, building a new cocoon. It's always going to feel that little bit of stretch. So if you can find a way to love it and be like, oh, so cool that I'm learning this now. And then so cool that I'm learning this now, instead of feeling like, And that's kind of just a mental game you have to play with yourself.
Right. Okay. Let me go some more.
Okay. Great.
Is that okay?
Yep.
Okay. So do they just relay the information? Taking the information from one person to the next. No culture added, no restructuring of the language. They don't find the meaning behind the message and reshape it into the target language. They don't match either client's language. That's what a relay interpreter is. And that happens often. So is that what a deaf interpreter is? So then we have shadow interpreting. It's different from mirror interpreting. Shadow interpreting is used a lot in the theater. If there is an audience,
He's moved on and saying, but mirror interpreting is when there is an audience and this is happening.
okay. All right, Nigel, we get it. So shadow interpreting is used in the theater. If there's an audience, then that's when you would use mirror interpreting. If someone misses a interpretation, then it could be mirrored and interpreted again.
Great job. All right. Is there any last minute thoughts, comments, ideas, concerns, bravos that you want to share before we disconnect?
I just want to say, Yvette, you did awesome too, because even since you paused it, we could be like, okay, what can be better and what can we fix? So I learned a lot, because I told Yvette, I'm like, can I start? Because the beginning's easier. I told her that before we started, so you had some really tough content. So thank you for going second and for just being willing to just pause it, because you didn't just like let it go and be like, okay, whatever, I'm just going to keep going.
Well, it's almost like I had Tiffany's voice in my head all of a sudden. It was like, why are you saying they? And every time I said so, I was like, so I appreciate that, but I definitely was beating myself up a little bit, but it's because I'm my own worst enemy. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, Yvette, you could do this like 4 weeks ago. Why is it so hard now for you to just express
Yvette,
the words?
I do want to say that whatever you had produced, and even the things that you did produce and then we went back over, your original production was not wrong. We were just looking for opportunities to say, how can it be more right? So just because you aren't at the most right that you know is possible doesn't mean that what you put out was not right. That was still accurate information. It was still what he said. We just were looking for opportunities to enhance it. So I think you really should just, if you can, I know it's hard. Yeah, we are.
Lay off myself a little bit.
Personal committee that it's like.
They're in there. Lyndsi, I'm really glad you recorded this because I think this is great.
I know, I do too. And I have one last question. So is this, how do you know that's capital D deaf?
Content.
Okay. I'm like, is there different signs? But yeah, okay.
No, because I also know that this sign that came right after it, this also has a non-deaf it's a cultural sign versus, especially because he did this versus this.
Yeah.
Right.
This is definitely a culture, has a ton of cultural meaning to it.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So
okay.
that's
yeah.
why. Yeah.
Okay. And I just wanted to thank you for all your time this week because I know we have a lot of students and that's a lot of your time. So thank you so much.
It is truly my pleasure. You both have my email. I put my phone number in, put it in your contacts in your phone. You can find me on the Utah registry. You can find me on the national registry. Wherever, if as you're going along, you think, oh, I would like to ask this from just a random perspective or whatever, I am happy to support. I'm excited to have great quality coming up because I'm getting ready to tap out. So, I appreciate you being here. It means a lot to me to have you invested in the program and invested in your work. So thank you for that commitment.
Thank you so much. It has really been, it's been great. Like this was I heard all good things about you and I knew that it was going to be awesome. Well, everyone is just like, Tiffany's amazing.
All right. Take care. We'll see you soon.
All right. Thanks.
Bye. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hey, that was really good. I had a lot of fun. She's like all business, which is good because like we only had an hour and that flew by fast. So thank you. I was literally nervous all week. I prepped a lot for the mentoring, but this one I didn't as much. So thanks for letting me go first. And I'm always nervous for the mentoring, but then I'm like, okay, it's just me. So if I screw up, like nobody knows. And so I was so nervous that you were in our meeting. So I'm glad that it, for me, went somewhat well. I think I was like really choppy with my words, but and I learned so much, like the they, the pronoun thing. I've gotten that comment like years ago at church. They're like, you didn't set up your pronoun, and I'm like, I'm trying. So this like makes it clear, and that she had us like go back and say, okay, where did you notice what the pronoun was? So thank you.